All right, let's go ahead and get started. It's 5 after the hour. I want to start by wishing everyone a very wonderful 2021. I think everyone's breathing a sigh of relief and hoping we will have a much better year. And certainly, we wish peace and comfort for everybody right now and going forward. Welcome to the Richmond Earth Series 2021. I get to say that for the first time. I'm Susanna Calvert. I'm the founder and convener of Mission and Vision for the Foundation for Family and Community Healing. I'm also leading the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Richmond Earth Ministry. And this is in partnership with the two organizations and the Living Water Community Center. I'm so grateful for you all to join us today at the start of the new year and really focus our attention on caring for and attending to our beloved Earth, who is also in need right now, at least I believe, and that we are coming together today to hear from our speaker today, Reverend Dr. Faith Harris. I also want to welcome the James River Hikers Meetup Group and the members of the Sierra Club Falls of the James chapter here in Richmond, and welcome everyone else who has come in from afar. We are now in our 9th month, and I think we have folks from all over the region, thankfully, and we're so grateful for your participation. This is a topic that has no boundaries. Let's see. So I am going to introduce our speaker and then hand it off to her. And at the end, I'm going to tell you about some exciting new programming that we have, as well as what's coming up next in the Earth series. So I hope you will stay tuned until the end and hear what exciting events we have coming up, and that you will join us going forward. Our speaker, I am so excited to have her back. She was here a few months ago representing the Virginia IPL, but she is Reverend Dr. Faith Harris, who is an assistant professor of theological studies for the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University. And she teaches in the study of systemic eco-theology. Like, isn't that the best topic ever? Like, I wish I could go back to school again for yet another degree. And womanist feminist theologies employing activism and community engagement in ministry. She is also the director of the Johnson A. Edesamwan Center for Faith, Leadership, and Public Life, or STVU, which convenes workshops, panel discussions, town halls, and other events to facilitate deeper and meaningful student and community engagement and dialogue related to theology and public and civic policy. It's just absolutely wonderful. She's earned a Doctor of Ministry and Master of Divinity degrees from Virginia Union University and a Master's of Sacred Theology with an emphasis in practical theology, Christian social ethics, and ecclesiology from Boston University School of Theology. What a amazing vitae, Faith. Thank you so much for talking to us today about Ecowomanism.
Thank you, Susanna. I'm so happy to be back with you. Good morning to everyone. Just hopefully we'll have a really great time and great conversation afterwards. I want to share my screen. I want to talk, use a PowerPoint presentation and to kind of walk us through. I'm really working through this book. It's Melanie Harris's Ecowomanism, African American Women and Earth Honoring Faiths. I think it will be a great, let's see if I can figure out how to share my screen again. Here we go. But I first want to start with, am I sharing? Not yet, okay. First want to start with a definition of womanist. Oftentimes people ask what's the difference between feminism and womanist. And womanist is a definition that kind of was adopted from Alice Walker into the theology and ethics Christian Theology and Ethics by several early, not around the 80s, 90s, women who did their work in African American women's perspective on what it means to be a feminist. And so Alice Walker has this 4-part definition of womanist, and it comes from the definition of womanish, a frivolous. It's the opposite of girlish, frivolous, irresponsible, and not serious. It's a Black feminist or a feminist of color, from the Black folk expression of mothers to female children, you acting womanish, i.e. like a woman, usually referring to outrageous, audacious, courageous, or willful behavior, wanting to know more in greater depth than is considered good for one, interested in grown-up doings, acting grown up, being grown up, interchangeable with another Black folk expression, you trying to be grown, responsible, in charge, serious. And then the second part of the definition, a woman who loves other women sexually or non-sexually, appreciates and prefers women's culture, women's emotional flexibility, values tears as natural counterbalance of laughter, and women's strength. Sometimes loves individual men sexually or non-sexually, committed to survival and wholeness of the entire people, male and female, not a separatist except periodically for health, traditionally universalist, and then loves music, loves dance, loves the moon, loves the spirit, loves love and food and roundness, loves struggle, loves the folk, and loves herself regardless. And then the fourth part, womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. And so, when people often ask that question, well, what's the difference between a feminist and a womanist? That is, it really is in degree, it's in intensity, it's in scope more than anything else. So womanists are in fact feminist. So I want to start with my slideshow, if I can figure out how to start it from the beginning. And again, this is a book called, the title is Ecowomanism, African American Women and Earth Honoring Faiths. And so I want to just start off with an overview of the book and the themes. So Melanie Harris makes this argument that eco-womanist, it's a paradigm of African American women and Earth, and that's what she does in this book. And she talks about it being a collective memory of family, faith, and safety, as well as the acts of resistance to domination and subjugation. It's a sense of home and reconnection to the earth. It's a relationship with the land, despite the trauma of slavery and the era of Jim Crow laws and practices of lynching and legalized white supremacy. So it's really a looking back in some ways historically of what African American women throughout slavery and Jim Crow and up until even today have used for survival and to be able to thrive. So eco-womanism is a method for the recovery of African American environmental history. It's a meta-narrative of environmental history, and the environmental movement is missing the experiences and contributions of African and Native peoples. And so one of her early critiques, one of Melanie Harris's early critiques is that, generally when we think of the environmental movement, we don't often, first of all, we don't first think of women. We think of people like Muir and names escape me right now, but we think of males, people who, were very instrumental in, let's say, the saving the parks or creating the national park system. So those are the people that we think of as the progenitors of environmental and the environmental movement. But what she's making the argument that historically, African and Native peoples have understood themselves through a prism or a lens of earth, relationship to the earth. So again, it's a paradox. On the one hand, we have this great migration paradox, leaving the terror of the South meant leaving home, and many arrived in the northern cities losing their identity, sense of belonging, respect for the land and community. So this is right after the emancipation, right? So many people who had been newly freed were trying to make their living on the land, with the land, but many found that it was impossible to do so because after Reconstruction ended, there was, a rise of terror against African American farmers and folk just trying to eke out a living on the land. But at the same time, there's this.
Kate,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I wasn't sure if you were meaning to show your PowerPoint, but we're still looking at your browser.
You're looking at what?
We're still looking at your Alice Walker browser page.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Thank you for interrupting. Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank
Sorry. Thank you for letting me know that. I would have gone on forever. Should I go back or? Well, that's just the first slide was just the collective memory, a sense of home, and a relationship, a balanced relationship. And then the definition, a meta-narrative of environmental history and the environmental movement, missing the voices and the experiences of African and Native peoples. And then we're here. So on the one hand, we have again, the Great Migration, people leaving the South, being forced out of the South. But on the other hand, there's this paradox, this other side of the paradox where there's this idea of beauty to burden. There's this gulf between the horrors of lynching bridged with spiritual intimacy to the earth. Home, the earth was home. Home to homelessness paradox, being ripped from homelands in Africa, with the struggle to forge connections in a new home right here in the United States, but then having to leave even those homes, and the connection to the land, the reconnection to the land here, and moving to northern cities where a disconnect, you could say, occurs. So in the eco-womanist themes, there are these themes of belonging, birthplace, home, respect for the land, respect and interest for building and keeping and maintaining community. Ecowomanism theorizes the self-love and freedom requires knowing one's identity on earth with earth, that there's no real possibility of loving oneself or having a sense of what it means to be really free without it including an identity that comes from a recognition that we are connected to and need to be in balance with the earth. The goal of self-determination is supported by social environmental enterprise that many of these women, particularly from in southern states, and particularly right after Reconstruction, were recognizing that self-determination comes from a connection to the earth and an environmental enterprise. Thinking about, for instance, Fannie Lou Hamer, one of the things she managed to do during the civil rights movement was to start collective farming and help farmers, Black farmers, think about the ways that they can pool their resources together and create community and make community wealth by collective farming. It is necessary to uncover one's own environmental familiar roots and spiritual connections to be whole, that is healthy, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So eco-womanists theorize and argue that you cannot be healthy without a connection to those spiritual roots that come from our connections to Earth. Ecowomanist ethic employs African cosmology, the idea that spirit, nature, and humanity are all connected in an interdependent web of life. I think that's familiar to many universalists, Unitarian Universalists, the idea of the interdependence of all life and the web of life. A deep respect for the earth and spirit world of ancestors and the creator as normative among many indigenous Africans who prioritized an ethical mandate to live in harmony with nature. And not just Africans, but other native people or indigenous peoples have always recognized the importance of being in harmony with nature in order to have a good sense of family and a good sense of even one's own identity itself. It also embodies a theory and practice, so that it's not just a theological argument, but it's a practical argument where putting into practice these theories and these ideas. So there is the practice of deconstructive analysis, uncovering womanist roots and debunking stereotypes. And the work there is more on the theoretical side, but it is recognizing the stereotypes and the realities and the policies that maintain an estrangement to the earth need to be deconstructed. There's a constructive approach that utilizes theologies, practices from non-traditional sources to develop environmental and spiritual praxis. So, as you notice that in the first part of the title of the book, it is Earth Honoring Faiths, not just one faith, but what are the faiths that are organized around Earth and identity and balance with Earth, and how do we draw upon those faiths and those traditions and practices in order to help to spur a positive outlook on the earth and a positive relationship, and explores the links between climate violence, white privilege, the historical impact of white supremacy in the United States and globally, and the environmental exploitative capitalist economic system. So recognizing that obviously there is a need to analyze and critique that which governs the economies of our world and the politics in our world in order to encourage, but also to understand how we have such an estrangement to the earth. Obviously, womanists as well as feminists are critique of race, class, and gender. White supremacy shapes environmental policy and perspective and understanding. So recognizing that, that the boogeyman is not just maleness or patriarchy, but it's larger than that. It is a system of thinking about the world based on hierarchy, and the hierarchy coming out of the Enlightenment and the colonialist period, where European whiteness was at the pinnacle, and all other peoples around the earth were somehow categorized below or in some kind of sub position or status. Assumptions about economic class privilege and shapes environmental outlook. So recognizing that underneath class and privilege comes along with it an environmental outlook that is often exploitive of the earth rather than of caring for the earth. Gendering the earth as mother and feminine fosters domination and subjugation. The idea of Mother Earth has often can have a positive perspective and outlook, but oftentimes if you look even among eco-feminists and womanists would argue that in some ways that by gendering the earth, it has made the earth in some ways equal to, or made women equal to this idea of the earth is to be subdued and subjugated, and women as well. The feminine, the culture and environment are parallel oppressions. Analysis uncovers innate solidarity between women and the earth, and that would be, from a womanist perspective, there is a positive connection that we also should explore. And then the way Black bodies of enslaved women were raped, dominated, exploited, and the way the earth is and has been abused in the system of white normativity or white supremacy, if you will. So there's a critique of those issues. What Ecowomanism employs a prophetic justice hermeneutic, that Black folk reading a biblical narrative pattern links social justice and divine justice. So that when reading from a eco-womanist lens is that there is, when reading the text, the sacred text of Christians and maybe Jews and maybe even some Muslims, that there is this reading that connects justice and divine justice, that there is no justice without social justice. Divine justice is not something that is about purely punishment, hell, and heaven, but it is about how we live on earth. So the covenant, so it starts with a covenant, a broken covenant, conviction, and then a call to return to covenant. And then eco-womanist methodology. One loves the spirit, acknowledges and leaves room for the mystical while maintaining a critical interdisciplinary analysis. Two, it's connected to intellectual lineage and history of African American mysticism and folk religion. So that would be, of course, connecting back to many of the traditions of the continent of Africa, as well as prophetic spirit and prophetic wisdom, which gives voice to the speaker, the reader, the student, the scholar of eco-womanism. And then honoring experience, story is the first step and source for eco-womanist ethics and theology. So instead of the Bible or any particular sacred text being the first place where eco-womanists start their thinking or their analysis or their storytelling, they start actually with the stories and the experiences of our ancestors, and particularly our mothers. So eco stories, eco theologies, earth stories, and eco memories, Black women's experiences with nature. So starting there, not really concerned about whether there is a doctrinal purity or standard, but that the stories of the people who actually lived and experienced that balance, of earth and human relationship are the stories where we want to start. Eco-spirituality, earth honoring faith, or earth spiritual activism are valid epistemologies for environmental discourse. They reveal earth justice as a primary value, often passed down from one generation to the next as a family and communal legacy. And so one of the important interests in her book is the stories of her own ancestry, her mother, her grandmother, and their love of the earth, their love of getting their hands in the soil, their love of growing flowers and vegetables, and keeping that as part of a value and a priority for their family and community. And so there's this important aspect of eco-womanism that requires an exploring of the autobiography, the eco-autobiography. So what are the stories of my family that help me understand our connection to Earth and to a balanced connection to Earth. So it's a recovery of eco-memory empowers African Americans to self-determination and to act for Earth justice. So when I look back at the stories of my mother and my grandmother, one of the stories my mother constantly told me as a child or talked about as a child, and her eyes would sparkle when she talked about their victory garden. She grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and her mother, my grandmother, always kept a garden in the city. And one of the things that they did was grow all kinds of vegetables that kept them throughout the winter, and gave them the possibility of being able to nurture themselves and to care for themselves and to have food at all times, because they had this garden. And just my mother talked about how she loved to go out into the garden and eat vegetables right off the vine, and how they shared it as a communal good for not just their family, but for other families as well. There's a recognition of the earth, interconnectedness of the earth and community, or rather all of life, so that the earth is part of our lives, that it is not something that is disconnected from us, but that we have no real life without a recognition and acknowledgement of our relationship to the earth. Recognition of the innate beauty and goodness of self in relation to all beings, and that the balance of being in harmony with the earth also provides immediately an access to be able to see the goodness and in other beings as well, so that it breaks down those walls that are acquired or we experience through the whole idea of hierarchy and good, and what is good and what is merited. Because when we look at the earth and when we are connected to the earth, we recognize the goodness of all that comes from the earth and is sustained and supported by earth and the environment. Recognition of the deep power of being, recovery of a knowing and a sense of belonging, a connection to all being and the earth community helps to heal the dehumanizing influences of white supremacy. So if we can develop a sense of our history and our autobiographical relationship to the earth, then we can recognize our own actual goodness and our self-worth, because we are actually connected to all of life in the same way that the rest of humanity is connected. Filling in the gaps of environmental history. So Ecowomanism fills in the gaps of environmental history, or is reconstituting a history by challenging false generalizations and gross stereotypes found in US history. So the idea of eco-memory as well provides a counter memory to the kind of the fairy tale mythological history that we that we learned, right, that we learned in our as children in our public school system, often in our history books, that leave out the very important stories of the peoples, or make them summarized into a simplistic paragraphs that many times leave stereotypes about Native American peoples as well as African peoples. A contemporary countermeasure, centers African American perspectives, voices, and experiences in environmental history. And it is obviously very interdisciplinary. It's an analysis that weaves in art and literature and ethics and geography and agriculture. So it is not just a theological, or philosophical memory or theory, but it weaves in an interdisciplinary perspective. And then we have this Lakota proverb. The old Lakota was wise. He knew that man's heart away from nature becomes hard. He knew the lack of respect for growing, living things soon led to a lack of respect of humans too. And that, I think, summarizes the goal of Ecowomanism, that if we can return to a balanced harmony with the earth and recognizing our stories and our identity to the earth, that it's not just something that we're discovering today, but it actually comes from, it's been handed down to us, and it is part of our story, our historical reality, that we can in fact not only learn to love and respect ourselves more and better, but we also will respect and love other humans as well, and with the same kind of love and respect. Um, so finally, is critical reflection of African American women's eco-memory surfaces this idea of two meanings of bound, that she focuses on, this idea of bound as tethered or trapped to never-ending toil of earth. So in some ways, we often think of, and a lot of times we see in stories and especially in TV portrayals of the days of slavery, that there was this kind of bound and tethered to this never-ending toil, which was in some sense true, in many ways true and real. But also there was this bound as connected to divine relationship through the earth. So there's this double meaning of being bound, one negative, one that is actually positive, that there is this way in which being connected to the earth is being bound to the earth, is being connected in ways that we recognize are in fact healthy and healing. There's the idea of beauty and burden paradox, the idea of connection to the calming, healing rhythms of the earth at the same time being marked by horrors of lynching and enslavement and oppression. So there was like the earth, being connected to the earth also could mean something that was for many people, particularly from contemporary people or people who are living outside of being connected to the earth, like in large cities, Detroit and Chicago, whatever. There's this memory of having to be run off of land to escape lynching and other kinds of oppression. But at the same time, the land and being connected to the earth can provide this healing and can be a restorative to community. Community is a primary eco-womanist value, and then the idea, another value or flexibility, the idea of improvisation, the genius of African peoples to persist, to survive, and to thrive in spite of these challenges. And then the tools for eco-memory um, and our social location, starting with where where one finds oneself, where one understands oneself to be, environmental experiences. So what are those histories? What, like the story of my grandmother's garden? It problematizes the normative claims of white normativity and white supremacy. And then people of color have a different entry point to environmental justice. They were the raw materials of economic colonization. So recognizing that, in many ways, the African peoples who were enslaved during colonial period, and as well as the native peoples who were here on this land and who were either oppressed or killed off, were actually part of what one might say is the actual entities and the resources being exploited. And so recognizing that that is part of the horror and the history that that people of color have experienced in this in this Western or contemporary world. Um, the working and living conditions, obviously, we've talked about that already. The idea of being part of the land, working the land, being bound to the land for the benefit of others, but never necessarily for oneself, but at the same time, being able to find some kind of healing and balance and spiritual strength from that same land. And land, how do we understand the environment when we think of recreational activities? And there's a need for recovery there as well. It's not necessarily a lot of Black folk are not really interested in camping, right? They're not really interested in doing activities outside. And that's an indication of it's an estrangement to land and not recognizing the value of that connection. So that's a work that eco-womanists must bring to the community. A quest to recover traditional skills and cultural practices recaptured and reinstated. And so there is this me and eco-womanist work and practice is the idea of we need to find ways to recapture those traditional farming skills and techniques and ways that people survive in order to find not just healing, but also to find survival and to increase uh, a sense of thriving and purpose and self-determination. And then it all leads to autonomy, self-determination, land rights, and civil human rights eventually and ultimately. Those are the goals. Um, and so that's really generally what I wanted to share about eco-womanism. But just to recognize that it really is the focus is really about remembering and recognizing and reconnecting to those very places and even some of them painful, but those very places and practices that kept Black folk made it possible for Black folk to survive the horrors of slavery, lynching, Jim Crow, and be able to thrive beyond that. And so how do we, instead of leaving that behind, how do we return to that to find a new way of looking at our world and actually be part of the work of caring for and saving the planet. Because in fact, when we do that, we're saving ourselves, but we're also, you know, we're also recreating a story that has been lost. So I guess we could have questions, or I did a lot of talking. I apologize.
Thank you, Faith. That was really remarkable. And I just had so many wow moments. I made note of them. But instead of me diving into sort of this self-gratification exploration of them, I'd like to open up the discussion to those who are logged on. We have about 30 minutes for QA discussion or whatever you want. So please, we have a small enough group. I think you can just unmute yourself and chime in if you have something you want to say.
Well, I'll jump in. Thank you, Faith, for that. I was remembering a conversation when you were speaking. I was remembering a dialogue that I heard Leah Penniman from Soulfire Farm lead once, and she was talking about permaculture.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that permaculture existed far ahead of some group of guys in Australia discovering packaging and marketing for sale the concepts of permaculture, and was speaking about the mothers and the grandmothers coming from Africa and those traditions that they brought in various different what you would say the premises
Mm-hmm.
of permaculture. And it just blew me away because it was knowledge I didn't have, but it was also a line of thought that had never occurred to me. It was a paradigm I didn't hold.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, what are ways that we can better understand some of those similar kinds of stories that just, for obvious reasons, have never made it into our understanding of those connections that you know, that and your ancestors, you know, have brought to this world is way more than we ever acknowledge. So
Yeah, so I think one of the ways that I've learned, because we're all in this learning this together, right? And so I never, like the story, the little story I told about my mother and her love of that victory garden, right? And her love of gardening and her love of and really it was my grandmother who was the gardener. But I think that, well, one of the ways that I have discovered these things is through my curiosity about different kinds of food. So I think one of the ways that we learn this is through understanding. Like recently, just a few years, probably like last year or the year before, was the first time I ever had a yellow fleshed watermelon, right? Watermelon is always red, you think, right? There's no other color. Well, I saw in the store yellow watermelon. I tried it. It has a little bit different taste. It's not super different, but it was just different. And then I started doing some research and I learned that watermelon grows wild in Africa, first of all. I didn't know. And it comes in yellow, orange, white flesh. I had no clue. No clue about these things. And just recognizing that there are so many parts of what we think are that we don't actually, I don't know how much time we actually spend thinking about where our food comes from, and how all of these different kinds of, that America really, that we have all different kinds of foods from all over the world as a result of colonialism, right? As a result of that we, like peanuts, that's from Africa, rice from Africa, all of these foods that are in our diet, our regular daily diet, and where they come from. If we do a little research, we learn there are ways that it kind of opens up new worlds to us, and it opens up new avenues of thinking about it. So the watermelon, right, during the era right after Reconstruction, the late 1800s, the late 1800s, early 1900s, you see all this memorabilia with these little black Pekingese eating watermelon and being ridiculed for water. It was always something that was offensive and sometimes embarrassing to me as a Black person, right? But I never knew that watermelon actually came from Africa, right? That it was and the reason why so many of the enslaved people who were out in fields working, in the hot sun and not having opportunities to take breaks and to get water or being treated with any kind of level of work ethic or work rules, they were able to survive because they were able to eat watermelon, because it was filled with water and sugars, and it was able to sustain them. Even kind of unraveling that. And so now when I see that memorabilia, it's not as offensive to me. I mean, I know it was intended to be offensive, but I'm not offended by it, because I recognize that's how my ancestors survived. That's how I happen to still be here, because they knew what they could eat to survive and what they could use to survive the horrors and the awfulness of those times. So I think spending some time learning about how these foods and how these different produce, how it came to be, part of our American fare and diet, is one way that I've found. But I think it really takes a curiosity. Just plain and simple, we have to care about like the missing stories and the missing historical record. And we can't just take it face value. if 2020 has taught us nothing else, right? If the summer and spring of 2020 and the uprising and the Black Lives Matter movement and all of that, it's taught us nothing. It really should have taught us that there's a lot we don't know, and that we might need to go back to the drawing board and re-educate ourselves about who we really are, and you know, be put on our grown-up pants, deal with the hard stuff, right? Get convicted if we need to be convicted, and do the things we need to do to heal and make our world the place that it ought to be, right? Yeah. I'm not sure if that's anywhere near what you were asking, but I just kind of went on a tangent there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Any other thoughts and comments? I have a couple if somebody doesn't want to speak up, but I'd love to hear from you. Faith.
Hi, Faith. Another Faith. You're still on mute.
Hi, Faith.
Hi.
I do not have a question, but I do have some appreciation to share for you.
Oh, thank you.
I want you to know how nurtured I feel.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad.
You were able to open fresh new territory in my brain while taking me to my heart.
Oh, wow. Thank you. We thank Melanie Harris for that.
Thank you also, Melanie Harris.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also want to, I don't know if you know how beautiful you are.
Oh, thank you.
Even the way your earrings move and the way your eyes light up when you present. And beauty is not an option to me.
Mhm.
And your PowerPoint, for instance, from my perspective, reflects your beauty and your heart. And so it was very stimulating, the information that you shared, and the way you share it nurtured so much of me that didn't even know it needed nurturing.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for that.
I appreciate you and Susanna and everybody who showed up to listen today.
I'm very thankful for the opportunity. Thank you, Susanna. This is a great opportunity to be able to share this, and I mean, it's an exciting opportunity for us to think about how we can be community, right? How we can actually save ourselves and our world. It is, and I love it. I'm drawn to it. Katie Cannon always talked about she's one of the early mothers of womanist ethics and theology, and she always says that we have to do the work that our soul must have, right? And that she took that from Alice Walker, but the idea of this work of discovering that there is something beautiful about our earth and our world, and it's not just the arguments and the science and the charts of climate change, right? Although those are important too, but that it actually is saving of our humanity, and it's a restoring of what we can be together. If we look at it from that lens, we also have so much more we can receive from this, at the same time as, restoring some balance to our earth and protecting ourselves from the devastation of climate change. So those things are critically important to our spirituality as well.
Thank you, Faith. Faith, both of you.
Yes, yes.
Hand up. Jenny, did you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm joining you today from Ohio.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I want to thank you. And I want to pursue the book, the Ecowomanism book, because I can see it's full of much more detail that I really want to read about. And while many of the things that you talked about today are concepts and issues and ideas that I've heard of before, they weren't new in and of themselves, but you certainly grew them for me. You kind of took it from a seed to a tree. And I appreciate that expansion, so that I know I need to go back and study some more. When we were talking about stories being so important and how do we access the stories, as a woman of European descent, my family stories are largely, out of that lineage. So
Right.
I think one of the best ways to enter into somebody else's head or life space is through fiction, because writers put their own history, they put their family stories, they put their culture into what they write, I think inevitably, whether they even mean to or not. So I was wondering if you have any fiction recommendations that would be not only enjoyable, but informative for us to read to get a better heart feeling.
I actually think that one of the things that the point that you raised about, you go to your lineage, right? It's not like Ecowomanist is not something that I would suggest women of European descent need to actually embrace, just to understand it in the same way it's a parallel to ecofeminism, correct, right? But it does raise the importance of knowing and understanding the history and being in touch with all of our ancestry. And so I think there's that point. So your family story that has been handed down from your mothers is a critically important story for you to unpack and to understand as well. But if you want, so that's one thing. But one of the books, series of books and writers that I would suggest, and I think she is, particularly from gives us a perspective and a lens that helps us unpack and understand our world currently, is Octavia Butler. She wrote, I don't know if you've read much of her. She's one of the few African American, really one of the first highly acknowledged and acclaimed African American science fiction writers. But it's not the science fiction of, like the typical Star Trek-y, Star Wars kind of but it's very spiritual. And it really is an analysis and a critique of our world in a way that I think is just really mind-boggling, and it just opens up the ability to kind of like read our world through a lens that is both healing, it gives healing possibility and survival possibilities, but also it recognizes that there's a real earthiness to it. It's not science fiction and technology, it's science fiction, but it connected to the earth and the balance and needing to be in balance with it. So the parable of the sower is one of my favorite of her books. But then she has the parable of the sower, the parable of the seed, I think.
Talent.
Earth seed. Yeah, the parable of the talent, earth seed. She has several, but I would start with parable of the sower.
I have that book. I bought it a couple months ago, although I haven't started it yet.
Oh, you'll love it. You are going to love it.
Yeah, I think so. There's a small Catholic retreat house that's fairly close to me, and they were considering using it for book study. So I went ahead and bought the book, but nothing's happened about the study yet, but at least I've got the book.
Yeah, it's a great book. And one of the themes of the book, or the major theme of the book, is nothing is constant in the universe but change. And recognizing the value and the importance and the prioritizing of being able to address and stay in sync with change, and not being resistant to it. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Faith, I had a question about your methodology slide. One of the things that you had on there was something like prophetic spirit and wisdom, which gives voice to the speaker or whatever, something like that. Could you just elaborate on what that is, what that means, what the more about that method or the idea of it?
So I think that the idea, oh, I know, this is the methodology slide. Okay, so let me see if I can share my screen again. So this slide, is this the one? Yeah. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, prophetic spirit and prophetic wisdom, which give voice to the speaker, the reader, the student, and the scholar of Ecowomanism. So there's a way in which, particularly in the academy, where the only value or given is what has already been written. Like, in other words, you can't, like, when you're doing your study, your dissertation work, nobody's really interested in your thoughts. They're interested in how you interpret and the thoughts of those who have gone before you, the dead. They call them the dead Germans, right? That was the Martin Bubers and the all of the the Karl Barths and all of those folks. And so what Melanie is pushing back on, and what Woman is pushed back on, is the idea that no, that we find value and priorities and values and truth, right, and reality and theology and ethics by unpacking these stories, the stories and the realities and the practices of our roots. And so, and the idea of prophetic, of course, is not this idea of, being able to tell the future, but it really is about forthtelling. It's about being able to interpret the now, the contemporary, the realities of everyday life. And so, and that those actually we give priority to those stories over and against those dead Germans, or those dead doctrine, the dead doctrine of that has kind of fueled Christianity for the last 500-600 years. So there is a pushback, and the same with ecofeminism as well, that there is a recognition that there is a need to actually re-envision and reinterpret all of theology based on the recognition that theology has been used, historically has been actually used to the benefit of exploiting the earth, not caring for the earth. So that ecofeminists and ecowomanists argue that we are not bound to those theologies, because if we continue to allow those theologies to control the narrative and to define define reality, that in fact we will end up having really no planet to live on, and actually destroying humanity, that we're headed for complete and full destruction of ourselves as well as our planet. And so we have the right and we have the responsibility. That's what prophetic in a real way is about, taking the right and responsibility to interpret anew and afresh.
Yeah, I imagine those conversations are probably not well received, but
not at all.
they are well worth saying.
No, they're not. And there's constant pushback and there's constant argument, because what has kept the academy alive are those, are all of really the current particularly theology and philosophy. They're still in arguments with the Enlightenment, right? We're still trying to unpack and have these arguments with Enlightenment so-called discoveries. And the reality is really have long since needed to move on and rewrite for ourselves something afresh and new, because we're living in a reality and living it with challenges to reality that they could never have imagined, but they created actually.
Are there other comments or questions from the listeners, viewers? I have another one if there isn't. Okay, that sounds like my invitation to go forth. So I'm still trying to unpack this, Faith, but I had this like huge wow moment when you were talking about this beauty and burden paradox. And I think that, I mean, my own lived experience is very much aligned with this, that there is beauty and burden and challenge and loss. I mean, that's how the foundation came about, actually, through a lot of loss. And to me, it's a big, beautiful blessing. The part that was kind of an aha moment was that the enslaved people were like turned to earth for healing, which is something also so central to what we're doing in the foundation. But the part that was like kind of a wow moment for me was that I think I had equated the decision by our capitalist culture to really be aggressive and abuse the land around the Industrial Revolution. But what you said made me wonder, like, okay, well, when we decide to enslave Africans, did we also decide to aggress against that connection with Earth? Did that happen then, or did it happen even before that? Like, when did that happen? And is there a connection between the enslaved Africans' connection to Earth and affinity to Earth and our capitalist American mindset?
Oh, absolutely. I often, one of my favorite scholars, Charles Long, one of the things he argues for in his book Significations is that enslavement of humans in Africa, right, was actually the testing of what we would call our modern economic system of capitalism. That's where capitalism cut its chops, in the remaking of the raw resources of human life, African human life, remaking it into slaves, free people, thinking of it as people coming to a continent, finding these free peoples, deciding their status and their worth was somehow less than subhuman to themselves, and that they could be useful materials to create a new world. They were seen purely and made anew into resources. And in the same way that we go find ore in a cave or oil out of the ground. And so that's also that burden, right? That burden of being seen as pure commodity or pure resource, and losing the connection to one's humanity by someone else's doing. But also at the same time, that connection to Earth is what makes you, right? What frees you, what gives you healing, what gives you calmness, what is your spiritual connection. So, and oftentimes the enslavers, those who did that, who were the colonizers, didn't understand that they were actually you know, what they were bringing with the, you know, that their assessment of the humanity and the worth of the humanity of Africans was so low that they did not recognize actually the wisdom, the genius, right, at the same time. And I think that's what Leah kind of pointed out with the whole idea of permaculture. So yeah, so these people were made into in the slave castles, kept there for 3 months, kept there and remade, right? Those, he called those factories. So those are the first factories of capitalism, the first mass production, right? Taken, captured, bought, however acquired, um, brought to the slave camp, kept there for 3 or 4 months, broken, remade, and then packaged into the slave ships, into the ships and the hulls of these ships like sardines, and brought to a new world, sold off and exploited for their work. And so without any regard to their humanity and without regard to their genius and their spirituality and what they had, you know, whether you use the language of God or creator or divine one, but what was innately given to them as people, as humans, in the same way that Europeans had their humanity, you know, acknowledged, was not given to them. And the same with Native peoples here, right? Kendall and I have written a chapter, and it should be coming out in a few several weeks. But it's about and it's about this very thing, the idea that that people that what happened with the start of climate degradation and change and the situation we're in now started with colonialist impulses. The kings and the Pope deciding, right, making theological and economic decisions to control the world in the name of Christ, right? All in the name of Jesus, right? All, we're going to go into the world. We will either subdue them, we will either convert them if they will be converted, or if we deem them convertible, we will subdue them or enslave them, or we will eradicate them. That, and for Native peoples on the Western world, in South America, they pretty much were eradicated. But African people were enslaved. And conversion was not the first, you know, really became on the back burner, because that was actually secondary to really gaining riches and wealth for the kings and for the nations. So yeah, I would say it started in the early 1400s with the Portuguese, who started the slave trade. A great book for that is it's called Christian Imagination, and it's written by, I can't think of his name. His name come to my brain is not giving me names today for some reason. But he talks about that was it's the major perversion of Christian theology, is this idea of having the right to hire, to give status to other human beings. So yeah, I think that, and so at the same time, there is a burden of being seen as, oh, you're a beast of burden, right? You're nothing but, you know, chattel. But there also there's this burden, but so there's many African American people who eschew the idea of anything to do with, you know, farming or land or environment, and because of that, that not wanting to be associated, and because of that historic stereotype and lens, and reality. And so that the role and the work of Ecowomanism is to break that open and help African Americans, and particularly women, to understand that this is a place of healing. This is a place of restoration, that we don't need to run from it. We need to actually run to it. Yeah.
Thank you, Faith. That was really, really wonderful. Okay, so we are at the end of our 30 minutes and I'm having trouble screen sharing, unfortunately. Not
Oh,
sure
have I
why.
stopped screen sharing?
I think you have stopped, but
Okay,
it's not letting me.
there you are.
Okay, here we go. Oops, wrong one. Okay, technical difficulties. So that was really just an amazing talk, Faith. Thank you so much. I think you opened up so many of our eyes. I wanted to give a quick shout out for what's coming up in our series. As you may know, mid-month we have a movie or video viewing and discussion. And so this month will be a TED Talk, so it's short. A healthy economy should be designed to thrive, not grow. So I think that builds upon very nicely about what we were just talking about our capitalist system and what it's based on and how it has fueled so much aggression towards people, other species, and Earth herself. Next month's speaker is Jay Tubb, who you might know him as the host for Citizens United, and he'll be talking about fossil fuels. And we will have a movie screening with the Environmental Film Festival next month. But I also wanted to let you know about this, some wonderful new series that we're having up. We're starting up with the Foundation for Family and Community Healing. So our lovely Faith, who I think just logged off, our other Faith, Grieger, is organizing a meditation that's 30 minutes long on second and fourth Monday evenings at 6:30 that is helping us to remember ourselves as Earth healers or partners in healing with Earth, that we are healed by Earth and we are also in reciprocal relationship with Earth to support Earth healing. So then that one will be January 11th, and you can, there will be an announcement for that going out to the Earth Series subscribers, or you could just email me and we'll be sure to send you the information. I am also starting my own series of personal healing. So January 4th, actually next Monday at 6:30, I'll be leading a guided meditation on balancing mind, heart, and your higher self or your soul, because sometimes we can get out of whack. So I hope you'll join us on our upcoming programming, and especially with our new healing series. And invite your friends and send it around because we are all in this together and in community. So thank you for your participation today. I really appreciate your support and interest for the Richmond Earth and Healing series. Please have a wonderful 2021, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Susanna, for having me today, and really appreciate all the good work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to stop recording, and Faith, if you can stay on, if you have a few minutes still.
Thank you all.